Look, when Henry Cejudo called me last month about wanting to wrestle again, I had to put the phone down for a second. This is a guy who's retired more times than I can count on one hand. And now he's talking about getting back on the mats with Real American Freestyle Wrestling. The conversation we had wasn't just about wrestling. It was about credibility, about what happens when someone keeps changing their mind in this business. I've been in this game long enough to know the difference between a fighter taking a break and a fighter who just can't make up his damn mind. Henry falls into that second category, and it's becoming a real problem. When someone retires from fighting, comes back, retires again, then shows up in wrestling, you start to wonder if they even know what they want themselves. The thing about retirement in combat sports is that it's supposed to mean something. When a fighter says they're done, there's weight behind those words. Their body's telling them to stop, their family wants them safe, or they've achieved everything they set out to achieve. But when you keep flip-flopping, those words lose their meaning completely. I remember when Henry first retired after beating Dominic Cruz. He had both belts, he was on top of the world, and he said he was walking away. Fair enough. The guy had nothing left to prove at bantamweight and flyweight. But then, less than 2 years later, he's calling me about coming back. Said he missed the competition, missed the spotlight. We made the Aljamain Sterling fight happen. He got his ass kicked, and boom, retired again. Now here's where it gets interesting. After that Sterling loss, Henry wasn't just talking about being done with fighting. He was talking about being done, period. But then I start seeing him pop up everywhere. Wrestling matches, media appearances, talking about this project and that project. The guy couldn't sit still if his life depended on it. When fighters retire multiple times, it creates problems that go way beyond just scheduling fights. Other fighters start asking questions. They want to know why this guy gets to come and go as he pleases while they're grinding it out, staying active, building their careers fight by fight. It's a fairness issue, and fairness matters in this business. The Real American Freestyle Wrestling thing caught me off guard. Henry's helping Ben Askren build something over there, and that's fine. Wrestling's in his blood. He was an Olympic gold medalist before he ever stepped into the octagon. But when I heard he might actually compete again, that's when the red flags went up. This isn't just about what Henry wants anymore. It's about what kind of precedent we set. See, there's a difference between supporting someone's passion projects and enabling behavior that hurts the sport's credibility. Henry competing in wrestling while talking about maybe coming back to MMA creates confusion. Fans don't know if he's serious about anything, and more importantly, neither do I. The conversation I had with Henry wasn't pretty. I told him straight up that this back and forth routine is wearing thin. Every time someone retires and comes back, it makes the next retirement announcement seem less genuine. It makes fans cynical. It makes other fighters question whether retirement means anything at all in this sport. But here's the thing about Henry. The guy's accomplished more than most fighters dream of. Olympic gold, 2-division champion, cleaned out 2 weight classes. Those achievements don't disappear just because he can't figure out when to walk away. The problem is that his indecisiveness is starting to overshadow his legacy. The wrestling community seems excited about having Henry involved, and I get that. He brings credibility to what Ben's trying to build with Real American Freestyle. But from where I sit, watching someone jump between retirement, comeback talks, wrestling, and whatever else comes next, it's hard to take any of it seriously. This isn't just about Henry, though. It's about the bigger picture of how we handle athletes who can't commit to their decisions. Do we keep the door open indefinitely? Do we let them come and go as they please? Or do we eventually say enough is enough? The truth is, I don't have all the answers. What I do have is a business to run and a roster of fighters who deserve to know where they stand. When someone retires, other fighters move up in the rankings, new opportunities open up, and the whole ecosystem shifts. But when that retirement turns out to be temporary, it messes with everyone's plans. Henry's situation makes me think about the nature of competition itself. Some people are wired to never stop competing, even when they say they want to. Maybe that's admirable. Maybe it's self-destructive. I honestly don't know anymore. What I do know is that it creates headaches for everyone involved. The wrestling thing might be good for Henry. It might give him that competitive outlet without all the complications that come with MMA. But part of me wonders if it's just another stop on a journey that doesn't seem to have a clear destination. Looking back on all of Henry's retirements and comebacks, there's a pattern there. The guy loves the spotlight, loves being relevant, loves having people talk about him. Retirement takes that away, And maybe that's harder for him to handle than any opponent he ever faced in the octagon. The question isn't whether Henry Cejudo can still compete. He probably can, in some form or another. The question is whether anyone should take his commitment seriously anymore. And that's something I'm still trying to figure out. What I told Henry in our last conversation is that decisions have consequences. Every time you change your mind, you burn a little more credibility. Every time you come back from retirement, it makes the next retirement seem less permanent. Eventually, people stop listening to what you're saying because they know it's probably going to change. But here's where I have to give the guy some credit. At least he's staying busy. Whether it's wrestling or media or whatever else, Henry's not sitting around feeling sorry for himself. He's finding ways to stay involved in combat sports, even if the path isn't exactly straightforward. The Real American Freestyle Wrestling opportunity might be perfect for Henry. It gives him competition without the complexities of comeback negotiations. It lets him use his wrestling background in a pure environment. And maybe, just maybe, it gives him a chance to prove that he can commit to something for longer than 2 years. As for whether Henry will ever fight in the UFC again, that's a conversation for another day. Right now, I'm more interested in seeing if he can stick with one thing long enough to make it meaningful. The wrestling world is getting a former 2-division UFC champion. They should be happy about that. The question is whether Henry will be happy staying there. The whole situation reminds me that managing talent isn't just about booking fights and negotiating contracts. Sometimes it's about helping people understand the consequences of their decisions, even when those decisions don't directly involve your organization. Let me tell you about the first time Henry actually called to discuss retiring. This was right after the Cruz fight, and he sounded different than I expected. Most fighters who call me about retirement are emotional, maybe a little uncertain. Henry was clinical about it, talking about his legacy, his accomplishments, what he'd proven. It felt genuine at the time. The problem started when he called again 6 months later asking about theoretical comeback scenarios. Not saying he wanted to come back, just wondering what it would look like if he did. That should have been the red flag right there. Truly retired fighters don't make those kinds of calls. When I look at Henry's situation compared to other fighters who've retired and stayed retired, the difference is obvious. Look at somebody like Georges St-Pierre. When he walked away the first time, he meant it. When he came back for the Bisping fight, he was crystal clear about his intentions. One fight, specific terms, no ambiguity. Henry's the opposite of that. The financial aspect of these multiple retirements is something nobody wants to talk about, but it's real. Every time Henry retires, he's walking away from potential earnings. Every time he comes back, it's partly because those earnings matter. I get that. This is a business. People have bills to pay. But the way Henry handles it makes it look like he's using retirement as a negotiation tactic. Here's what really bothers me about the current situation with Real American Freestyle Wrestling. Henry's not just participating, he's helping shape the direction of the entire organization. Ben Askren's putting a lot of trust in someone whose track record with commitments isn't exactly stellar. What happens if Henry decides wrestling isn't for him either? I've had conversations with other promoters about this exact issue. Once an athlete establishes a pattern of unreliable commitments, it becomes industry-wide knowledge. That reputation follows you everywhere. The thing about Henry that makes this more complicated is his genuine love for wrestling. I believe he's passionate about what Ben's building. But passion alone doesn't guarantee follow through, and Henry's history suggests that when things get difficult, he might just walk away from this too. There's also the question of what this means for the younger fighters who look up to Henry. When they see someone with his accomplishments treating retirement like a revolving door, what message does that send? That commitments are optional? That words don't have meaning? Those aren't the lessons I want people learning from this sport. The Olympic gold medal is what separates Henry from most other fighters dealing with retirement issues. That wrestling background runs deep, and maybe that's why the Real American Freestyle Wrestling opportunity feels different to him. I've watched Ben Askren try to build something meaningful with this wrestling project, especially after everything he went through with his health scare. Ben's committed to this in a way that's admirable, and he deserves partners who match that level of commitment. I hope Henry can be that for him, but hope isn't the same as confidence. The broader question is whether combat sports need to establish some kind of cooling-off period for retired fighters. Maybe you retire, you stay retired for a minimum period before you can even discuss coming back. It sounds harsh, but it might force people to think more carefully about those decisions. Henry's current media appearances show he's still sharp, still engaged, still has that competitive fire. The question isn't whether he could compete again. It's whether anyone should believe him when he says what his intentions are. Trust, once eroded, doesn't rebuild easily in this business. What I find interesting is how Henry talks about his wrestling involvement with more detail and specificity than his UFC comebacks. Maybe that's maturity. Maybe it's just better preparation. Time will tell. The business side of Henry's retirement pattern creates problems most fans never think about. When he retired after the Cruz fight, we had to restructure the entire bantamweight and flyweight divisions. Fighters moved up in rankings. New title eliminators got booked. Marketing campaigns shifted focus. Then Henry wants to come back. And suddenly we're dealing with fighters who feel like their opportunities got stolen. I remember Petr Yan's team calling me when Henry started hinting at a comeback. They wanted to know if their path to the title was about to get disrupted by someone who couldn't make up his mind. That's a legitimate concern, and it's one I didn't have a good answer for at the time. The psychological profile of fighters who can't stay retired is fascinating to me. Most of these guys, the sport defines them completely. Take away the competition, the training camps, the media attention, and they don't know who they are anymore. Henry's different because he's got other things going. The wrestling background, media opportunities, business ventures. But even with all that, he keeps getting pulled back. There's something about being the center of attention that Henry needs. Watch his media appearances, listen to how he talks about his accomplishments. The guy feeds off recognition, and retirement takes that away. Wrestling gives him some of that back, but it's not the same level of spotlight that comes with UFC competition. What makes Henry's situation more complicated is his relationship with other retired fighters who've stayed retired. Daniel Cormier's been supportive, but I know DC has opinions about the multiple comebacks that he keeps private. When you're in the Hall of Fame and you see someone with similar accomplishments treating retirement like a part-time job, it has to be frustrating. The contractual implications of Henry's pattern are something we've had to adapt to. Standard retirement clauses don't account for someone who might change their mind every 18 months. Legal had to create specific language about comeback timeframes and conditions. That's paperwork that shouldn't need to exist. Henry's age is another factor nobody wants to discuss openly. The guy's not getting younger, and every time he talks about coming back, he's talking about competing against fighters who are 5, 6, 7 years younger than him. The Sterling fight showed what happens when father time catches up, but Henry doesn't seem to have processed that lesson. Let me be specific about how Henry's indecision affected other fighters. When he was hinting at a comeback after the Sterling loss, we had to put Marlon Vera's title shot conversation on hold. Vera had earned his opportunity, but suddenly we're dealing with questions about whether a former two-division champion might jump the line. That's not fair to Marlon, and it's not fair to the sport's integrity. The same thing happened with Merab Dvalishvili. Guy went on an incredible win streak, but every interview became about whether Henry Cejudo might come back and disrupt the bantamweight landscape. These fighters shouldn't have to worry about ghosts from the past affecting their present opportunities. Ben Askren's position in all this is something I think about more than I probably should. Ben's building something real with Real American Freestyle Wrestling, and he's doing it while dealing with his own health issues and recovery. The last thing Ben needs is a business partner who might decide wrestling isn't for him after 6 months. But Ben's also smart enough to know what he's getting into with Henry. I've talked to Ben about it directly. He acknowledges the risk, but believes Henry's wrestling credentials are worth it. Ben thinks the Olympic background and the technical knowledge Henry brings outweigh the reliability concerns. I hope he's right, because Ben deserves partners who match his commitment level. The policy implications of Henry's situation are something we're actively discussing internally. Do we need formal cooling-off periods for retired fighters? Should there be limits on how many times someone can retire and come back? These aren't easy questions, but they're questions we have to address. Other major sports leagues have dealt with similar issues, but those leagues have different structures. In individual combat sports, one person's indecision can ripple through entire divisions. What frustrates me most is that Henry doesn't seem to understand the collateral damage his pattern creates. Every time he hints at a comeback, it affects matchmaking decisions, marketing plans, and most importantly, other fighters' careers. This isn't just about Henry anymore. It's about the precedent we set for everyone else. The media plays a role in perpetuating this cycle. Every time Henry gives an interview, the comeback question gets asked, and Henry never gives a definitive answer, keeping the door cracked open just enough to maintain relevance. Looking at Henry's wrestling involvement now, I see it as potentially the best outcome for everyone involved. It gives him competition, it supports Ben's project, and it keeps him away from UFC comeback discussions. If Henry can commit to this path and stick with it, maybe we can all move forward. But here's my final thought on the Henry Cejudo situation. The guy's accomplished more than enough to secure his legacy. The multiple retirements don't erase the Olympic gold or the UFC championships. They just make him harder to take seriously when he talks about future plans. And in a business where credibility is everything, that's not a small problem. Henry Cejudo will always be remembered as one of the most accomplished fighters in MMA history. But how he's remembered might depend on whether he can figure out when to stop talking about what comes next and just focus on what's in front of him right now.